this morning to participate in this program that the National Military Park is conducting as part of our recognition of the anniversary of these events this year, the 155th anniversary. And as hopefully you recognize, we were here on this morning of the 25th of November, this year a Sunday, but in 1863 a Wednesday. So we're in this program, we're going to look at part of the fighting that occurred up here on November the 25th, the primary day that the action is focused along Missionary Ridge. And in particular, we're going to look at the role of one brigade of Texas troops in the fighting here on what's called the Tunnel Hill portion of the Missionary Ridge battlefield. What we're going to do is, after an introduction here, we will we'll walk up the North Crest Road here and enter the Sherman Reservation further to our north. And we'll transition then from the pavement, which beyond the gate is probably leaf covered, onto a mowed grassy area, and we will make it eventually to the top of this hill, and then we will come back down this trail through the woods here to conclude our program. I've handed out to you all. Let me grab of the battlefield, but I've also handed out the brochure for Arkansas Post National Memorial and a map of the Battle of Arkansas Post. And as I started to do that, I said that folks probably are wondering why here on the Missionary Ridge battlefield I'm handing out information about another National Military Park, or another National Park System unit, and another engagement. Anybody figure out why that I might have done that?
My suspicion is that the Texas troops at Arkansas Post were paroled and were also involved here.
You are correct. The Battle of Arkansas Post, and for many of you all, this harkens back to a discussion we had a few minutes ago. The Battle of Arkansas Post is one of the more overlooked or forgotten or little understood and little studied battles. Has anybody actually visited the Arkansas Post battlefield? I have. And that gesture of having both hands in the air might not be inappropriate for this discussion, because one of the points of controversy about that battle is that as the Federal assault began, that you can see on that map of the battle, all of a sudden, beginning to appear along that Confederate defensive line, where you see those red blocks for the Texas troops and a few Arkansans along there, all of a sudden pieces of white cloth began to appear in the air. And one report was that it was a relatively white shirt, at least at one point, that got hoisted into the air, and forevermore after that surrender, there would be the debate over whether or not the hoisting of the white flag was authorized by anyone, or whether it had just begun at the soldier level there on the battlefield. And those Texas troops and the Arkansans who were with them would bear off and on from that point on the ignominy of having surrendered or been surrendered at Arkansas Post, despite hard fighting that many of them would subsequently do. That would always be brought up relative to their history subsequently. Once they came to this army, they one time will even be chided by some soldiers passing their camp, saying, don't hoist up your shirt. You don't need to surrender to us. That battle marks these units. Some of you all will know, and I've got a couple of these to spread around, and so folks can see them. I don't have enough for everybody, but folks hold on to them just a little bit at different places, and you can see the. Some of you all will know that on the top of the hill here behind me, there is a cast iron tablet for James A. Smith's brigade. And on this sheet, I have the heading of that tablet, listing the organization of that brigade. And we will eventually see that tablet in our tour. And if you now begin to compare the organization of Smith's Brigade here at Tunnel Hill on November the 25th, 1863, with the Arkansas Post map, you will find all of those units on the Arkansas Post map. There were, by November of 1863, some of the other Arkansas Post units have been placed in other organizations or have been sent on other assignments. So if you did a one-for-one comparison, you will not find the entirety of the Arkansas Post garrison in Smith's Brigade by November. But you will notice that it is a mix of infantry and dismounted cavalry. Texas was a relatively new state. Distances were, and still are, large in Texas, and people were very proud of their horses. And so, as Texas began to organize troops for the Civil War, what was one of the things that lots of Texans were willing to potentially enlist in, a cavalry regiment. Very quickly, Texas has lots of mounted regiments. But I don't know if any of you all have ever owned and tried to maintain a horse, but it is very expensive, and the Confederate Army realized that they could only afford so many cavalry units. And after the 15th, 17th, 18th, 24th, and 25th Texas Cavalry, and actually a couple of others, got sent out of Texas, and in this particular case to the Arkansas Post area. They were told that they were being dismounted. Now, they were promised that at some point they would be remounted, but they never were. And they will serve as infantry from that point forward. But as an effort to maintain some esprit de corps, and also probably to engender amongst the men the hope that maybe someday they would see their horses again, they continue to be known as cavalry, with the denominator added to it that they were dismounted. Because of just sickness and illness, as those units were organized in 1861 and 1862, the units were not at full strength by the time that they are around Arkansas Post in late 1862. or early 1863. And so not all of these regiments were actually captured at Arkansas Post. Portions of them are still west of the Mississippi River, and will have various histories there. The only the core of the units are actually captured at Arkansas Post, and after being captured there, with the parole and exchange system still functioning, they actually get to enjoy a little northern hospitality. Now they are captured in January, and by the parole and exchange system, they have to be handled or processed in a particular fashion. So they are loaded on steamboats or at Arkansas Post on the Arkansas River, and they are sailed down the Arkansas River into the White River and into the Mississippi River. And initially they thought they would be going straight to the Vicksburg area, where they would be issued their parole and sent back into Confederate lines. Lo and behold, when they reach the Mississippi River, they do not turn south. Instead, they turn north on the Mississippi River and will wind up being imprisoned at several places, including Camp Butler near Springfield, Illinois, and Camp Douglas outside of Chicago. Now they get there in January. Let's see here. No, I guess she's not in this group today. But some of you all have probably at least visited Chicago. You know what Chicago's nickname is, right? Mm-hmm. Windy City. Most people who visit Chicago are smart enough to not go in the wintertime. But imagine living in a wooden barracks just off Lake Michigan in what today would be Southside Chicago. And there, sickness and illness will take a greater toll. And by March, when the decision is made to actually send them back to the Confederacy, dozens of the men in both Camp Douglas and Camp Butler have died of disease, and the many others are very sick. They will be transferred from the prison camps in Illinois eastward, because at that time Ulysses S. Grant is launching yet another of his Vicksburg campaigns, and they can't use the exchange point designated by the cartel on the Mississippi River. They get a railroad tour of the North, some of them going all the way to Buffalo, New York, and then down to Baltimore, Maryland, where they are put on steamboats and sent down the Chesapeake Bay to the Hampton Roads area, and then up the James River, and just off City Point in the James River. They will be, the paperwork will be processed, and they will be turned over to Confederate authorities. By this time, it is April. They are put in camps around Petersburg, Virginia. Their officers are not yet processed through. And anybody know anything that happens in late April and early May in Virginia? Chancellorsville, yes, Chancellorsville. And one part of Joseph Hooker's plan for Chancellorsville was that his cavalry under George Stoneman was supposed to launch a raid on Richmond. And Stoneman actually did ride south towards Richmond. And when Richmond learned this, there is all of a sudden a panic in Richmond about defending the capital of the Confederacy. And guess who has suddenly become available as defense troops? These Texans and Arkansans of the Arkansas Post garrison. Officers are assigned them. They are armed with some of the first Austrian rifles, a short two-band, generally 54 caliber arm that the Confederacy has begun importing, and they are sent to Richmond, where it is found that Stoneman is not actually mounting a real threat, and as a result, but they are held in the city, some of them even getting to camp on the Capitol grounds, and then tour the Confederate Capitol. They do get their officers back, and then they are started westward, they believe, to go back across the Mississippi River. But in late May, as this is happening, William Stark Rosecrans made one of several threatened advances from Murfreesboro, and there is a threat against Bragg's army in Middle Tennessee, and they get diverted to Bragg's army, and they arrive only to find that they are not needed, but the decision is made that they will stay in Bragg's army. But who wants them? What do they carry? The stink of a questioned surrender at Arkansas Post. I mentioned the chiding that those soldiers get. Well, Patrick Claiborne says that he will give them a try. And they become a part of his division. And at Chickamauga, this division is commanded by the Alabaman, James Deshler, who was killed on September the 20th in the assaults against the Union left on the Chickamauga battlefield. And in the aftermath of that, the brigade in the fall of 1863 reorganizations will be reorganized, with the Arkansans being transferred out to Govan's Arkansas Brigade, and the brigade is just left with the Texans, organized as you see there on the tablet, and they receive a new brigade commander, James Argyle Smith, a Tennessean whose family had moved to Mississippi, where he got an appointment to West Point, graduating in 1853, having service on the frontier, including in the Mormon War in 1858, and then when Mississippi seceded, he will that spring resign his U.S. Army commission and join the Confederate States of America. Serving as a staff officer to Leonidas Polk in 1862. He then gets a command of a Tennessee regiment, which by losses at Shiloh and other factors is reduced in size, and eventually that regiment and another are consolidated, and they become known as the 5th Confederate Infantry, which Smith will lead at Perryville and at Stones River and Chickamauga. But after Deshler's death, Smith will be promoted to Brigadier General and get command of this brigade. And he will lead the brigade onto the battlefield here at Tunnel Hill. The commander of the 6th and 10th Texas Infantry and the 15th Texas Cavalry is this man, Roger Quarles Mills. No known wartime uniform photograph of Mills is known to survive. This photograph is taken in late 1859 or 1860 when Mills is a member of the Texas legislature. He is involved in Texas's secession from the Union in the spring of 1861, and then goes off and raises a regiment and soon becomes an officer within it and the colonel of the 10th Texas Infantry. The 7th Texas Infantry in the brigade is commanded by Hiram Bronson Granberry, who eventually gets command of the brigade, and this brigade in the last year of the war is known primarily as Granberry's Brigade. He'll be killed in the Battle of Franklin in November of 1864, along with Patrick Claiborne. So these are the regiments. I don't have a photograph of any of the officers of the consolidated 17th, 18th, 24th, 25th Texas Cavalry. But these are the regiments of of that brigade and some of their officers. And they almost were not here for the Battle of Missionary Ridge because Claiborne's division was being sent by Braxton Bragg to reinforce James Longstreet's effort against Knoxville, and they in fact were over at Chickamauga Station being loaded on, or getting ready to load on trains. Ah, very good. We have an audible landmark. The whistle on that diesel is sounding because they are approaching the wet. Notice how the sound all of a sudden disappeared? They were approaching the western portal or western entrance of the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad Tunnel in Missionary Ridge. They have to sound the horn before they enter that 983-foot long tunnel in Missionary Ridge, completed in 1859, and it is that tunnel that gives this part of the battlefield its name. It runs through the ridge, just a little bit south of where we are right here. Goes through the ridge in this low spot or saddle between this hill to our north and the next hill to our south. Unfortunately, they do not have to sound the whistle or horn as they leave the tunnel, and so we won't have the same audible indicator of when they come out of the tunnel. So, when the Federals advanced on Orchard Knob on the 23rd, Bragg recalls Claiborne's division, and they are marched back from Chickamauga Station to Missionary Ridge, and will spend the night of the 23rd and the early morning hours of the 24th along Missionary Ridge, the area of Shallowford Road southward to Bragg's Reservation. And they will begin to build some of the first field fortifications along that section of the ridge. Ironically, it is the Confederates on that section of the ridge who will collapse first under the weight of the Federal assault on November the 25th. When Bragg learns of the Federal crossing north of Chattanooga at the mouth of South Chickamauga Creek on the morning of the 24th, Claiborne's division late that morning will be ordered to march north. And one of the officers in the 6th, 10th, and 15th in Mills's regiment will write, all at once in the afternoon, we were put in motion and started off at the double quick to the right. We knew from the way the couriers were dashing around, the serious expression on the faces of those in high places, the haste with which we were being moved, and the old decks of playing cards the boys ahead of us were throwing away, that somebody was likely to get hurt, and we were on the race with the Federals for some important point. Referring to the playing cards, it is strange that men will carry something in their pockets that they are ashamed of to be found with in death. We had seen this throwing away of cards before, but enough of this. On we go. Leading Claiborne's division northward is Smith's brigade, only about 4,500 men strong. Claiborne will detach his smallest brigade, his old brigade under Lucius Polk, to go over to South Chickamauga Creek, where the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad, this railroad that goes through the ridge here, where it crosses the creek. And Polk's partial brigade will be tasked with guarding the Stone Arch Bridge over the creek at that point. The other three brigades come up from the south, and Claiborne gallops ahead to figure out where they are going to be deployed. And when he arrives here in the area of the tunnel, he finds one of William Joseph Hardee's staff officers here, and that staff officer begins to give him directions as to to how to deploy his brigade. Now, if you look on the color map that I gave you of the battlefield, this, of course, shows the situation generally on the 25th of November, but just a little bit to the upper right of center of the map, or you can, right near the center of the map, you can see the symbol for the railroad that is labeled Chattanooga and Cleveland Railroad. That's the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad. And if you follow that eastward, you will see that it's a little hard to read, but there is the word tunnel. And the railroad goes through Missionary Ridge there in the tunnel. And that's what's just behind you there to the south. We are right about where you see Brown's Brigade and the artillery pieces there. If you notice up here where the blue blocks are for the, let's say, Sherman's assaulting lines, and in particular, the blocks for Lightfoot's Brigade, Alexander, and Cockrell, you will notice that there is another hill mass there, a separate hill. Only being discovered really by many people at this time is the fact that Missionary Ridge terminates here at the banks of South Chickamauga Creek, northeast of Chattanooga, in a series of semi-detached or entirely detached hills. And one entirely detached hill is this one that eventually the Sherman will occupy with Lightburn's, Alexander's, Cockrell's troops. As Sherman approached, as Claiborne approached, he is ordered by Hardee's staff officer to try to occupy that hill with one of his brigades. And James A. Smith's Texans, leading Claiborne's division north, will get that assignment. We don't know their exact route, but both men in the Texas Brigade and the Mississippi Artillery Battery accompanying them at that time, the Warren Light Artillery, say that they cross the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad over the tunnel. And so they are probably marching up through this low ground here, somewhere to the east of the main crest of Missionary Ridge, marching up this way, but now they have to get up to that other hill. They come up over this rise here, and then down where Campbell Street is located today. There was a road that went down at the time, and they go down in the flat where the Glass Farm neighborhood is located today, and at the time, the Glass Farm itself. So we're not going to emulate that exactly, but as we get ready to move northward ourselves, we're going to go in that direction, but we're going to stay up on the hill here. So I don't have all day to do this in a more chronological fashion. So, questions or observations at this point?
Yeah, I have one question about this map.
Okay.
To the northwest of where we are here, on the map it says Rom and Ewing and Mathers. There's a X or a plus sign in red. What is that?
The little red X. That we're going to find is a Confederate counterattack.
Okay.
And it went that far. All right. Okay, let's march up this way.
Do you want these back?
Yes, I can get them back. Potentially inflict them upon someone else in the future. Remember the guns and tablet here for Barrett's Missouri Battery. Two of their guns will indeed be here on November the 25th. There'll be other guns here in this low spot as well, which I'll mention a little bit later on. Remember the 24th of November was rainy, foggy, misty, drizzly, low visibility, low cloud ceiling. There was more visibility than we have right now, but the mist in the air is probably pretty historically accurate.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of those.
Has been carved into the side of the hill. So take some of this dirt that we're walking on and spread it back up slope, and you get some sense of just how steep this hill was. Tours up here on the north end of Missionary Ridge in November, and we've walked out to this point. And so I'll have to ask, actually get you all to testify for me that previously there was some reason to walk to this particular point and look through the thinner trees here. That's because that separate hill that on your map has the blue blocks for Lightburn, Alexander, and Cockrell. If you look under them, you can see the contour lines for that hill. That hill should be in view. Now, in some ways, and I don't know if y'all have ever been with me when I've tried to do this in the summertime when there's leaves on the trees, but in the summertime when there are leaves on the trees, this is kind of the view you get. You can't see really anything out there. We have walked out on the map. If you look from the blocks for Lightburn, Alexander, Cockrell, if you look south, you'll see the blue block for Corse, C-O-R-S-E, and then just south of that, you will see a zigzag red line. And we are kind of at the north end of that zigzag red line right now. That's where we would be, and we would be looking towards that big hill up there. And that is where Smith is told to go. And he is marching through the low ground, through the John Glass farm fields, down there. And just as the head of his column gets to the base of the hill and his skirmishers start to go up that hill, just what Claiborne had been warned was likely to happen, happens. The Federals, who have crossed the Tennessee River at the mouth of South Chickamauga Creek, Sherman's men, have advanced now eastward, and as Smith's men try to advance up onto the hill where Alexander and Cockrell's blocks are shown, the Federals come up the western face of the hill and reach the crest. Federal skirmishers come over the crest of the hill, look down into this low ground right over here, and see a Confederate column coming towards them with their own skirmishers out in front. And a skirmish fight begins. Smith quickly realizes that the Federals have won the race. They've won the prize. They've got the hill. And Smith, having already been told that if he can't get that hill before the Federals do, that he should then fall back to this rise, which is where the main continuous line of Missionary Ridge begins and stretches southward. And Smith's men do. Claiborne says that Smith's men will fall back by the right flank. He's not more specific, but I think what he is describing is that all three of the regiments, the consolidated 17th, 18th, 24th, 25th Texas Cavalry in the lead, then the 7th Texas, and then the 6th, 10th, and 15th Mills's regiment. They are marching one behind the other. The 17th, 18th, 24th in the front, the 10th or Mills's regiment behind. They're marching northward. They're now informed they can't get to the top of the hill over there, and the command is they now are going to go up onto this hill, and the command is now given to go by the right flank. They were marching right in front, the right end of their battle line, leading. And so I think what we would have seen is almost simultaneously the heads of those 3 regiments would have turned to the right, and we would have had 3 short regimental columns of 4 climb up this slope to where we are now. Smith will deploy his 3 units. Technically, they're called battalions, these consolidated organizations, with Mills's on the left, and then the 7th Texas and the 17th, 18th, and 24th Texas Cavalry are deployed. They are folded back so that their line of battle runs east and west, and their line faces the front. They refuse the right end of the brigade. And so Smith's brigade forms an L with 2 regiments along this spur that we've walked a portion of now and stretching southward, and somewhere, probably in this area or just a little bit further to the north, there was a 90-degree bend, and the 3rd Battalion, the 17th, 18th, 24th, and 25th Texas Cavalry, was formed so that their line of battle ran east and west and faced to the north. That's particularly important when Sherman's troops, who first get to the top of the hill, the crest of the hill right over there, continue on across and get to the crest of the hill over here. Additionally, as you can see on the map, where Carl Schurz and Orland Smith's Union brigades are shown, or divisions are shown near Boyce's Station, there were some of Sherman's men in that area on the 24th as well. And there's a little engagement there across the creek. And so the right flank of Smith's brigade is folded back. This is just before dark, and it got darker earlier that day because of the overcast and the rain. One of the artillery batteries in the division, probably Douglas's Texas battery, will deploy on the top of a hill to our south, and will fire a few shots at the Federals on the hill, taking position on the hill across this draw or ravine. The Federals will manhandle some artillery pieces of their own to the top of that hill, and just about dark, there is a short artillery duel between a couple of Confederate cannon on the hill to our south and Union cannon on that hill to our north. Darkness settles over the battlefield, and Patrick Claiborne and William Joseph Hardee begin to make plans for the coming day. One of the first things they do is, learning that Lookout Mountain has been lost, what do they think is a possibility that night of the 24th? The Confederates might retreat away from Chattanooga entirely. And since flooded Chattanooga or Chickamauga Creek is only a short distance in that direction behind Claiborne's line, Claiborne orders his artillery and ordnance wagons and ambulances across the creek at the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad Stone Arch Bridge. He sends his staff officer Irving Buck to Bragg's headquarters so as to receive information in a timely fashion, and Buck returns about midnight with word that Bragg has decided to stay and fight on the 25th. With that, Claiborne orders his artillery and ordnance wagons and ambulances to return across the creek the next morning at daylight, and he sends details to the baggage wagon train to gather up as many axes and other tools as they have, and bring them forward. And that night, Smith's men and the other 2 brigades of Claiborne's division, Lowry's and Govan's, deployed to the south, and their deployment will be adjusted that night as well. But Smith's men begin to dig in the early morning hours of the 25th. They begin to build field fortifications. Now, they mostly have axes, which means they can cut down trees. They're not able to do a great deal of digging. They don't have a lot of digging tools. They are not yet carrying sets of tools for field fortification construction purposes. But they'll put the axes to work. Now, they are going to be handicapped in that work that night, because that morning, beginning about 1:30 a.m., something happens. Anybody know what that is? The eclipse of the moon. It was near a full moon at the time, but there was an eclipse that morning. It began about 1:30, and the height of it was a little after 3 a.m., and it will not be over until about 4 a.m., and for about an hour's time, between about 2:30 and 3:30, it is pitch black dark, made even worse by the reduced night vision of the Confederate troops as a result of the poor nutritional value of their rations. Claiborne's men, Confederates generally, complain about the eclipse. Troops on both sides note the eclipse, but the Confederates complain about it, because when it was dark, to them, it was pitch black dark. They could not do anything at all. Now, I have to say one other thing here. Wait a minute. What took effect that night? The eclipse between about 1:30 a.m. and 4:30 or so, which means what's happening? It's clearing. The rain of the day before is passing on to the east, and the sky is clearing so that the eclipse could have an effect. The Claiborne and Hardee continue to examine the ground, and they decide to make some adjustments in the deployment. And after the height of the eclipse, apparently, is when they make this decision, with Federals now on the tops of both of the knolls of that separate hill over there, fearful that the Federals, particularly on, as we view it, the right knoll, will be able to enfilade Smith's line along here where we are. They decide to make an adjustment in Smith's line. And Smith is ordered to abandon the positions of the 17th, 18th, 24th, and 25th Texas Cavalry and the 7th Texas Infantry, and pull them back and deploy them further to the south. But they will leave their skirmishers out in position in the low ground down in front. This is done, as I say, probably after the height of the eclipse, based on soldier accounts. And about 3 a.m., the skirmishers in front of the 17th, 18th, 24th, and 25th will be changed, and another company sent forward. The commander of that company, Captain Samuel T. Foster, will write in his journal, about 3 a.m., I was ordered to take my company and go forward and relieve the pickets. The night was very dark, and here along these high mountains and steep hills and tall timber and thick undergrowth, of course it was very, very, very dark, italicizing or underlining the last very. I went forward, found one end of the picket line that I was to relieve, and followed the line, leaving one of my men every 10 or 15 feet as he could find a suitable tree to stand behind. I then made arrangements to pass any word from or to me along the line from one to another, and stood perfectly still till daylight. down in the low ground, the valley there, Captain Samuel Foster's company of the Consolidated 17th, 18th, 24th, 25th is deployed as skirmishers. He goes on. At daylight, they discover that the brigade is not behind us. They go out before the adjustment in the line is made. As soon as it is light enough to see anything, one of my men, Theo Cullen, says, "Captain, I can see one. Can I shoot at him?" I told him to wait until it was a little lighter and then blaze away. He fired at him a few minutes thereafter, and in so doing, fired the first gun for that day. As soon as the boys can see, they open fire all along the line, which is replied to by the Yanks. I lost one man here by the name of George Woods, shot in the throat. It cut his windpipe. We keep up a brisk fire until 8:30 or 9 o'clock, when the Yanks charge us, or rather, they advance with their line of battle on our skirmish line. I pass the word down the line to fall back slowly, but keep firing from tree to tree as we fall back. Questions or observations here?
Who was that writing?
Captain Samuel T. Foster, and his journal has been published as one of Claiborne's command.
Okay.
It's very good. Some of his entries are extremely brief. He might even cover a whole month's time period in a sentence if he didn't think anything important was going on. But some of his battle descriptions are very, very good. So, it was published a number of years ago now in a pretty large edition. So I suspect if you put it into your smartphone, and you should have good coverage because there's a cell tower right there. On Amazon, you'll probably find a copy for not all that much. So,
Got it. Thank you.
okay. Any other questions or observations here? Now, I won't make you spread out at 4-pace intervals. I won't take you over there into the woods and find some trees. I'd like to do that, but the undergrowth is too thick. This area was wooded, but it was, as we'll hear, mostly largely open understory and larger trees. I wish the understory was thin enough, because I might then indeed take you over there in the woods and spread you out at 4-pace intervals and let you each find a suitable tree, number you off 1 through 4, and then we'd start falling back in front of the Federal advance. That first Federal advance that Foster is talking about are Union troops of James Lightburn's brigade that come off of the eastern or right knoll of that hill mass. They'll come down that slope through the low ground, through which we can hear a relatively important road that runs today, as then, and they will then, somewhere in that low ground, encounter Foster and his men, and then begin pushing them back towards wherever the Confederate line is now. All right. Well, let's move, and we will emulate that. Sir, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. And there is some suggestion by Federal accounts that the Confederate field fortifications that were located along the line of this spur that we're walking, that they were just over the crest. They may not have been far enough down to be truly on the military crest, but it is clear from Federal accounts that they were not on the highest part of the ridge. But they're the works that the 7th Texas began to build along here are now abandoned. There is a little bit of dirt thrown up, not much again, because again, mostly what they have is axes. But there have been felled trees and limbs and branches and other things piled up. You can envision the start of a crude line of field fortifications along here as we walk along. Stones River, Chickamauga, and now here at Chattanooga, the armies themselves begin to say, oh, this use of field fortifications is a good idea. We should have within the Army the means to construct field fortifications. And by the spring of 1864, both armies, North and South, have created sets of tools for each brigade level organization. And so when the Atlanta campaign begins in May of 1864, every brigade has a wagon that is assigned to do nothing other than carry a ratio of shovels, picks, and axes, so that they can then be used to build true field fortifications.
So that was not implemented by Joseph Johnston. It was.
Johnston learned, like other officers did, that the soldiers are starting to push stuff up in front of them. And finally, in the spring of 1864, the armies say, well, if this is going to save the soldiers' lives, if this is going to get them to fight better, then we need to facilitate that. And so we will commit the transportation, the forage, and the treasure to provide those tools. And that's why in the Atlanta campaign, you see the ever increasing use of field fortifications. And in fact, if you visit Atlanta campaign field fortification sites, you can actually see the complexity of the field fortifications get greater as almost literally every day of the Atlanta campaign passes, because more and more people, more and more individual soldiers start to learn, oh, this is what you need to do. You don't need an engineer officer anymore to tell you where to put the works or what to build. You do have to, there are a few instances like some of the field fortifications at Dalton. You can't always use those as an example of this because they were constructed in the winter of 63-64 before the campaign began. But there are some around Dalton that are not constructed until the campaign began. But all of the field fortifications at Resaca were constructed by the soldiers themselves once the armies got there. And when you look at them, they are much simpler than the field fortifications that you will find there are a few surviving at Cassville. The next ones that really survive in any number are around New Hope, Dallas, Pickett's Mill. Those are more complex. And then by the time you get to Kennesaw Mountain, they are extremely complex because so many people have learned how to place field fortifications on the ground.
Without orders.
Without orders. They can look at the ground and they say, this is where they should be, and they start doing it. So, here it is more just the soldiers pushing stuff up.
So the line of the advance, the Union Army is the direction.
The initial attack is coming this way, and so Foster's men are falling back through this area and down through this low ground here. Right here, it would have been the skirmishers of the 7th Texas. So Foster goes on to say, after falling back about 200 yards, we come into open ground. That is no undergrowth, but plenty of large trees. So I could see nearly all my men at once, a thing I'd not been able to do heretofore. They are in a very good line, going back from tree to tree. Stop and load and shoot 2 or 3 times, and then go on again. The Yanks press us very hard. We kill several that we see fall. Our boys would see one of their men a little in advance, and they would hide behind a big oak and be nearly certain to get him. And then he would move on. seemingly satisfied with what he had done. After going this way about 3/4 of a mile, probably less than that, but if you're being shot at, you're not going to make the best estimate of the distances, we find the brigade behind some temporary works made that morning of logs piled up on each other. I assemble my men, get over the works, and take our place in line. By the time they're back here, they're going to see the new line of their regiment in the 7th Texas on the crest above us here. And mostly for most of you all to your left front in this direction. Through the haze, you can see an artillery piece up on the top of the hill. And so the 7th Texas and the 17th, 18th, 24th, 25th Texas are over here to our left front. Now, the next federal unit attacking is John Corse's brigade. Some of you might have noticed the tablet we walked past. The last time they saw the Confederates the night before at dark, where did they see Confederate soldiers beginning to dig in? On this spur. And that morning, which dawned misty and foggy, but it was a ground fog that burned away, when they lined up, they actually assaulted this open spur. And as they pushed the skirmishers back, what did they find? There's no main Confederate line here. They will come up and occupy the abandoned Confederate partial field fortifications, mostly taking shelter on the downslope side of them, because where do they suddenly find the Confederate line is now? Up there on the top of the hill. But let's get up there and find out how these Texans are now deployed.
I wonder if this tree was hit.
There's a slight possibility. Here is the tablet that you saw the top of a few minutes ago. Before or as darkness settled on the battlefield on November the 24th, as Claiborne and Hardee realized that increasing number of Federals were occupying the crest of that detached hill, they became concerned, as I said, that Federals there could potentially enfilade the part of the Texas Brigade deployed along this open spur. So early that morning, they will order the 7th Texas and the 17th, 18th, 24th, and 25th Texas to fall back, and instead of having the line formed with 2 regiments facing to the west and 1 facing north, they redeploy the brigade so that now 2 of those regiments face north, and only 1 faces to the west. Here, and they decide to make that bend or angle here on the top of this hill. The more open area, it's still wooded, but very open trees. And they recognized that the top of this hill would be an excellent place for artillery. This is where 2 guns, probably of Douglas's Texas battery, had fired from briefly the evening of the 24th. And now, as the brigade redeploys, Claiborne orders that a space be left for a battery. The 1 regiment that is facing to the south, the 6th, 10th, and the 15th Cavalry, they face to the west, but they stretch south. Their right flank, this end of their line, is described as being close under the crest of Tunnel Hill. So somewhere down there, about where the vegetation begins probably, is where their right flank was. And Claiborne says that a space of 60 yards was left, and that to the northeast of the right flank of Mills's regiment was the left flank of the 7th Texas, about 60 yards away. That's going to be in the woods here, about another 10 or 15 yards. And in fact, if you can kind of envision 10 or 15 more yards into the woods there, and then draw a line down to the edge of the woods there, that's about 60 yards. Now, why would he leave this 60-yard space here? Of course, he's going to put artillery. But why is it 60 yards? Guess what the proper frontage of a four-gun artillery battery is? Almost 60 yards. 14 yards between the guns, and with space on either side. You have just it's about 56 yards, so 60 yards would be just about right. And in this space, the Warren Light Artillery from Vicksburg, Mississippi, now under Lieutenant Harvey Shannon, the battery commander, Charles Sweat, away from the battery at the time. The four 12-pound Napoleons of that Mississippi battery are brought up here and put into position. They are capable of firing both to the north, the northwest, and the west from this position. Now, normally, that would be more evident. But today, in the haze, it is less so. But they can cover the large glass farm fields out over here. They could fire down into them, and then they could fire through the trees towards the hill where the Federals are located. Now, we left Captain Foster and his men going over their regiment's works, which are going down the slope over here and facing to the north, and along behind them come the Federals. The first Federal units moving this way, coming off of that hill, part of James Lightburn's, part of Joseph Lightburn's brigade. That it's only a small force, but then the 920 men of Corse's brigade will move off of the hill down through the ravine and move up and occupy the abandoned field fortifications there. When John Corse got into those field fortifications and saw that the Confederate line is now up here, he orders his brigade to redeploy, basically make a big right wheel, swing around so that they can then launch an attack against this point. And they will do that about 11 o'clock, and will attack towards the Confederate line here. Preceding that attack, the Federal artillery, increased overnight by Federals dragging more guns to the top of the hill there, has opened fire on this position, particularly as the ground fog burned off. And Federal observers in the valley below say it was an interesting sensation. It was a ground fog that had risen from the ground, and as the sun burned it off from the top down. And given the height of the ridge, Federal soldiers in the valley say that the Confederate line appeared to be on top of that fog, because as the fog lowered, you could see the top of the Confederates on the top of the ridge first. As soon as the Confederate line here came into view, those guns will open fire. During the course of the day, the 10 or so guns that are over on the top of that hill will fire at least 650 rounds in this direction. So there's going to be a lot of artillery coming in on this position. There may be more. I'm trying to figure out how many rounds each one of the batteries fired, but one of the chiefs of artillery says that he fired 650 out of his batteries themselves. So, at 11 a.m., Claiborne says, the first serious fight of the day commenced. It was heavy along all of Smith's line and extended some distance south of the tunnel. The right of the enemy's line, the troops who were sweeping through the field and trying to come up the western face of the ridge, exposed the right of their line to the fire of several artillery pieces planted over the tunnel, where Barrett's Missouri guns were by where we gathered, along with Keyes' Arkansas guns. And they were met by a brigade sent by General Hardee to the foot of the ridge, and it swayed back and forth for some time, but they did not dare to advance nearer than 400 yards, and finally lay down, contenting itself with sending forward large bodies of skirmishers and sending to the rear a much larger number of stragglers. The enemy's left, however, under the shelter of Smith's abandoned works of the night before, and protected by the woods on that flank and by the precipitous and heavily wooded sides of Tunnel Hill, advanced rapidly on Smith's line, and finally made a heavy charge on Sweat's battery at the apex of the hill. The artillerymen stood bravely to their guns under a terrible crossfire and replied with canister at short range. But still the enemy advanced. When he had reached within 50 steps of the battery, Brigadier General Smith charged him with the right of Mills's regiment. Of course, his men pressing primarily this way, with the Federals stymied out there in the fields. Smith orders the right half of Mills's regiment to basically swing around, wheel around into the attack. And also the left of the 7th Texas, the part of the Texas troops right here. Smith's north front pouring into him from the breastworks, a close volley at the same time. The enemy was routed and driven back to his cover behind the hillside and the abandoned work. In this charge, Brigadier General Smith and Colonel Mills were both severely wounded. Smith was struck a projectile about knee level, goes through his leg, goes through one leg and into the other leg, and he'll be carried to the rear. Quarles is wounded seriously in the left forearm and will be carried to the rear. Colonel Granberry, 7th Texas, now assumed command of Smith's brigade. In less than half an hour, the enemy made another desperate charge. He was met by the Texas men and artillery in front, and Douglas's Texas battery enfiladed him from Govan's line on the ridge where Lightfoot Mill Road is today, where you are parked. And Lowry's extreme left regiment got a long-range volley on his flank, and he was driven back in confusion. In these attacks, Lieutenant Shannon, commanding Sweat's battery, was wounded. The command devolved on Lieutenant Joseph Ashton, who had just become an officer in the last couple of days. And in a few minutes, he was mortally wounded. The command then fell on Corporal F.M. Williams. So many non-commissioned officers and men had been killed and disabled in the battery that Colonel Granberry was forced to make a detail from the infantry to work the guns. There was now a short lull in the battle, during which, at the request of Colonel Granberry, I detailed the 2nd, 15th, and 24th Arkansas consolidated under Lieutenant Colonel Warfield from Govan's left and posted them immediately in rear of the battery on the top of Tunnel Hill. And I sent 2 of Sweat's 12-pound Napoleons to report to Colonel Govan, as Douglas's guns were too light to be effective in their present position. And I ordered Keyes' battery of 4 light field pieces to move up and replace the guns sent off, and put Lieutenant Key in command of all the artillery on Tunnel Hill. One of the Confederates experiencing that attack is Captain Foster. They have fallen back into line, and as he goes on to write, then the fun commenced in earnest, and it was kept up until night. Now, in a few minutes, all is quiet, but soon a battery on a high place just to our left opens. A battery on the top of the mountain in our rear opens, shooting over our heads. That's the guns of Douglas's battery, back where two of Sweat's guns are moved. In a few minutes, the Yankee line of bluecoats came in sight at about 400 yards, and then our small arms and theirs all open, and they keep coming. But when they get about 100 yards closer, they fall back in bad order. In other words, they run, all of which I enjoy hugely, and we just laugh and holler. By going just over the hill 500 yards, they are out of sight of us. They reform and come again, and just to see them bluecoats fall is glorious. We can see them dropping all along their lines. Sometimes great gaps are made. They can't stand it, and away they go to find shelter from our bullets. In a little while, a fresh set comes. They have a flag. I told my men to go in for the flag, and down it came. Another picks it up, and down he went, then another, until away they all go, leaving 3 dead in trying to carry that flag. They got in nearly 100 yards of us before they broke, and there was a great many dead left on the ground, and wounded ones crying for help. One man is helping another to get away, and they are both shot down together. Now the fun of all this is that we are behind these logs and are not getting hurt one particle. From the noise of on our left, they are charging all along the lines, but the artillery and small arms are making a constant roar all the time. We don't notice it except when we happen to stop a little while in our front. Our artillery keep up a continuous roar as fast as they can load and shoot them. There are men bringing us ammunition, and the men don't put the cartridges in their boxes, but lay it upon the logs in front of them to be convenient. Here they come again for about the 6th time, and they come like they were going to walk right over us. Now we give them fits. See how they do fall, like leaves in the fall of the year. Still they advance, and still we shoot them down, and still they come. Oh, this is fun, to lie here and shoot them down, and we not get hurt. Arkansas Post was not like this. This is business, and we can see what we are doing here. When we kill a man, we know it. We see him fall. They are now coming in running, stooping low to the ground. But when they get within 50 yards of us, they halt, commence wavering. Some keep coming, others hang back, and some are killed in 20 feet of our works. And finally, without any command, our men commence jumping over the works like sheep and yelling like only Texans can, and charged into them, killing a great many more, and run them back again. I was standing on top of the logs, yelling like an Indian, when some poor deluded Yank, not having the fear of Confederates before his eyes, supposed to be a long way off, shot me in the right leg. The ball going crossways just under my knee and just over the big leader. Several cried out, "Captain, you're hit! The captain's hit!" And several came to help me. At first, I could not realize that I was shot. It felt like someone had struck my leg with the side of a ramrod or a stick and benumbed it somewhat. The boys soon ripped open my pants, and there it was, bleeding very freely. No mistake, I was wounded. The litter bearers are called. I'm put on a litter, and 2 men take it up and go in a trot until they get over the hill and out of range of the bullets, where I am put in an ambulance and carried to the field hospital. When this first attack, primarily against Smith's, now Granbury's north front, is repulsed, there is a lull for a time, but then in the afternoon, more federal brigades are sent forward. The next brigade is going to be part of Bushbeck's brigade, Pennsylvanians and New Jerseyans. The 27th and 73rd Pennsylvania will charge in amongst the buildings of the Glass Farmstead, which will be set on fire during the course of the fight. There were still civilians sheltering in the buildings of the main house of the glass house. They come running through Confederate lines. The 27th Pennsylvania then will charge up the slope here, coming up from on the west side. And they'll come up on this side of the line. They will get within a short distance of the crest. And about somewhere along in this time, the 6th, 10th, and 15th Cavalry, having taken apparently some casualties, their line is contracted a little bit further to the south, and that Consolidated Arkansas unit under Warfield is moved up onto the line here as well, facing out to the west. Soon, another Union brigade will attack. They will be following basically the same course that Corse's brigade had earlier attacked, but part of them will be coming up the slope right here below us. As we walked along, you might have noticed the back of an Illinois monument perched on the slope along the road. They'll work their way up under the slope, but be blown down or blown to a halt by the fire from here on the top of the hill. And soon thereafter, Green B. Rom's Union Brigade will attack into this same area as well, but be halted by the fire. But there are enough Federals now clinging to the side of the hill, and those down there sheltered by the abandoned Confederate works, that some of the Confederate commanders, including Lieutenant Colonel Warfield, are concerned that the Federals might get enough strength and organization to rush these last few yards and break into this Confederate line. It is suggested to Patrick Claiborne that a sortie or a counterattack be launched. And by this time, part of Cummings' Georgia Brigade has come up in reserve behind Mills's regiment, although Mills is now carried to the rear wounded, but they are available here too. And two of the Georgia regiment, along with Warfield's Arkansans, are going to be the main part of the strike force, and the left of the 6th, 10th, and 15th. And they are to move out onto the slope below and sweep in on the flank of the Federals and try to drive them back and capture as many as they can. They will indeed do that. When the Georgians went over the first time, they encounter significant Federal fire and are blown back, but they reorganize and try it a second time. And this time in particular, the left wing of the 6th, 10th, and 15th really has an effect, and they go sweeping down the hill into the flank and even rear of the Federals. And on this map, you saw that I was asked about the red X out there in the field. They are going to sweep all the way down the slope and out into the field against those Federals. They're going to wind up capturing about 500 Federals and 8 or more battle flags. The accounts of the number of battle flags vary. Some of these Union regiments are using flank markers or guide-ons, and some of those apparently get counted as flags. The 6th, 10th, and 15th Texas say that they capture 7 battle flags themselves. Claiborne in his report says that he has shown 4 that regiment captured. It is possible that they got more than 4 because after this and the fighting at Ringgold 2 days later, some of these wounded Texans are in a hospital in Marietta. They're not very badly wounded. They're able to commandeer a separate room within the hospital, which they designate the Texas Ward, and amongst them are a couple of the battle flags that they've captured either here or at Ringgold. and they tack them up on the wall in the room. They were supposed to turn them in, but they have them. They tack them up on the wall in the Texas ward and dare anybody to come in and get them. And when they leave the hospital, they take the flags with them. They'll capture a number of flags from the Federals and sweep the Federals clear of much of the slope. However, those Federals, some of Corse's men, and others who have taken shelter in the abandoned works, are able to repulse this Confederate counterattack. And another Federal unit had tried to make an assault from the north, has been halted, and they have begun to dig in on the end of the open spur out there near where we stood to try to look towards that separate hill. But now darkness is beginning to settle over the battlefield. Claiborne's men are still where they had been. Smith's Texans are still here. A cheer is gotten up or is raised right at dark, indicating that they have held the battlefield. But of course, what we know is that in late afternoon, what had happened further to the south, the Confederate line has been penetrated. They'll learn that night and have to withdraw from this position. For these men who had the stain of the surrender at Arkansas post upon them, some of that stain will be erased, or at least challenged by their fight on this ground. They'll suffer out of about 1,500 men. They'll suffer 222 casualties. Not a very high percentage of casualties, largely because of the protection of the field fortifications that they have in fighting on the defensive.
How many Union losses?
Well, and you can see here, and this is when you compare the casualties between the two sides here, the Union troops attacking in this area are mostly Morgan L. Smith's troops, Hugh Ewing's troops, and John E. Smith's troops, and you can see the number of killed, wounded, and missing amongst them. And then this is part of Claiborne's division, and this is going to give a total for Claiborne of 441. And so in this case, and most of Claiborne's casualties are men who were killed and wounded, just like amongst the Federals, although many of these missing for these Federals are men who were captured. And some of the captured are counted in the wounded here as well. Much of Smith's division, much of all three of these divisions attack. So let's see here, 103, 740, 1200.
Wow.
Yeah, and some of Claiborne's other troops are engaged as well, as you can see by the casualties.
Wow, yeah.
So the Texans don't inflict all of these casualties, but this is the primary point that is being attacked. So.
And why did they pull back from those originally partially
They
constructed?
And it was harder to see today because you couldn't see that other hill. That other hill actually, and you can see on the map, that other hill kind of laps around that spur.
Okay.
Sometimes I try to explain how that hill sits as using my my hand here. If I got a hammer and hit my thumb there and made that swell up, it would be better. But that hill sits there like this, and this spur, this part that we're on now, sticks up in here, and so Claiborne was concerned that if they stay here, Federals up here would be able to enfilade that line. Yeah. And that would be more obvious if we could see that hill today.
Okay, yeah.
And on the map, you know, there's that spur there, and
He was afraid that
that that they'd get artillery up there as they did,
and be able to shoot
and shoot
down
down.
the
Yeah.
flank. Okay.
So, this unit of flowers, what were they doing?
Well, they're on this hill, and they are going to put some long-range flank fire into the Federals who try to attack this way.
And they didn't press forward. Why? Because that would expose the flank.
Right. Yeah. They're really guarding the Confederate flank here in conjunction with Confederates who have been put into position on this side of the creek. Because what they were afraid of was that the Federals might cross the creek somewhere in here and try to get into their rear. And the Confederates had real reason to fear that, because the Federals had indeed built a pontoon bridge across flooded South Chickamauga Creek near its mouth. And they had sent a cavalry brigade across that bridge, which on the night of the evening of the 24th had ridden through this area, cut the railroad at Tyner Station just off the edge of the map here, and then rode on to Cleveland. Now, the Confederates at this moment don't know it, that is a raid aimed specifically at Cleveland. But as reports come of Federal cavalry going this way, there was concern that the Federals might be trying to turn that flank in a broader fashion. And the South Chickamauga Creek is running bank full because of the recent rain, and the most assured way to cross the creek, they've got some pontoon bridges down here near Chickamauga Station on the creek. The most assured way to get across the creek is the Stone Arch Bridge on the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad there, and that's why Claiborne is concerned. He wants to make sure that they can retain control of that. So.
Are any pieces of the bridges still in existence?
No. Unless Mark Brainerd, who's a railroad historian here in the Chattanooga area, has figured it out in the last 6 or 9 months or so. Mark and I haven't seen one another a lot in this year, primarily because of stuff I've been doing and stuff he's been doing. He's been helping the Atlanta History Center out with the new Texas exhibit, which just opened last weekend. We continue to look for when, and if you let me get my knapsack, my bag.
Come on, Bubba.
We continue to look for when this bridge disappeared. We don't have a photograph of it, but we do have a piece of soldier art. Actually, 2 pieces of soldier art. A soldier in the 105th Ohio did this painting, this watercolor painting of the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad Bridge in early 1864. That's one view. And here is, oh, did you hear the artillery fire? So, here's the other views. But it survives the war, but by 1870 something, it is definitely gone and has been replaced by a truss bridge on the piers that you see standing in the creek there today. So one of the flood events or something caused it to be washed out. Now, if it's a flood event, you might think that that might get newspaper coverage, be rather spectacular. Since we haven't seen any evidence of that yet, perhaps it was developing structural problems, and the East Tennessee and Georgia simply took it out and replaced it, and that might have gotten less attention in the media, particularly if they put the new bridge in, which is on a slightly different alignment, particularly if they put the new bridge in before they took the old bridge out.
They had a bridge.
They had, right. So the fact that they put a new bridge in might only get a brief mention in the newspaper, the corporate records of that railroad are again extremely difficult to access. That railroad was bought and bought and bought and bought and bought, and it is now part of Norfolk Southern, or when that alignment was last used, it was Norfolk Southern, and Norfolk Southern, let's see, sometime in the last, sometime about 8 years ago, would that be right? 26. Yeah, sometime probably about 8 years ago, closed their corporate archives again. They won't allow people to look at even the old historic records. They're between 2007 and early 2017, there was a revival of the reparations, people advocating reparations for slavery. And these railroad companies were big slave owners. So Norfolk Southern closed their records again.
Interesting.
Yep.
Is that the escape route for this group?
Yeah, this is how when they retreat, this is how they get out. So, and I should say, and I almost forgot, I didn't put them in the right sequence. But as you can see, there are other tablets here, one for Maney's brigade, one for Lewis's brigade. Other Confederate units are sent up here to potentially assist, and parts of those units will be engaged. The 1st and 27th Tennessee. The 1st Tennessee is the Sam Watkins Regiment that many of you all know, Company H, that soldier memoir. Although Watkins is not actually on this part of the battlefield. He's on picket or skirmish duty, and he's still down further to the south here. His regiment has come up here, but he's still on the skirmish line down there. Also the Kentucky Brigade, which had been Helms at Chickamauga and Alice Joseph Lewis's, they'll be up here, and each of those brigades will have part of their forces engaged. The 1st and 27th Tennessee is fighting up here late in the day, the 50th Tennessee, which is now part of Maney's brigade, will be engaged in the fight here. Their colonel, Sugg, will be mortally wounded. We have a Sugg. Let's see. Sugg is in your family tree, so
right,
he would be your great grandmother's.
My great grandmother's brother.
Okay, great grandmother's brother.
One of 4 brothers who were fighting for the Confederates. Another brother was here as well. 2 other brothers were here as well.
In the 50th?
No.
Okay.
This is west.
Let's see. I always have to look at that. No, this is actually east.
It's east, okay.
Yeah. You'll notice that there was a wooden trestle approach to it here. And this is where the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad went over the Western Atlantic Railroad. And the East Tennessee and Georgia built this embankment, and they built this cut limestone block, basically a culvert, to go over the Western Atlantic Railroad. And this became known as the Rock Eye. And there are still people. It didn't get replaced with concrete and steel until like the 1930s or 1940s, and there's still folks here. They're now probably all in their 80s or maybe their 90s who knew this when it was still cut limestone block construction. Still knew it as the Rock Eye.
The Rock Eye.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions or observations? Okay. Well, we have to begin our own retreat.